Welcome back to XRP Global Crypto, the channel where we bring you the real numbers, the real facts, and the real future of XRP in global finance. I'm so glad you are here today because what we are about to break down is something that very few people are talking about with this level of detail and honesty. We are going to talk about Trump, we are going to talk about Bitcoin, and most importantly, we are going to talk about XRP and why the math behind this digital asset will completely blow your mind. If you have been on the fence about XRP, if you have been wondering whether Bitcoin is really the answer to America's debt problem, or if you are already holding XRP and want to understand exactly why your investment makes more sense than almost anything else out there right now, then you need to watch this entire video from start to finish, because by the time we are done here today, you are going to see the crypto world in a completely different light. So let's get into it right now. Let's start by talking about something that has been making waves all across the internet, and that is Trump going on air, again talking about buying crypto. Now, before anything else, I want you to really pay attention to what he is saying, because there is a very important conversation hiding inside his words that most people are completely missing. Trump has been talking about using Bitcoin to pay off the United States national debt, which is sitting at around $35 to $36 trillion right now. And on the surface, that sounds exciting, right? A sitting president or former president talking openly about crypto as a legitimate financial tool for the most powerful country in the world. That alone is huge. That alone tells you that crypto is no longer a fringe idea. It is no longer something that only tech nerds and internet enthusiasts talk about in dark corners of the internet. Crypto is now a mainstream conversation at the highest levels of government, and that is something every single XRP holder should feel incredibly good about right now. But here is where it gets really interesting, and this is the part that I think somebody needs to sit down and explain directly to Trump himself, because the math just does not work when you plug Bitcoin into this equation. Let me walk you through exactly what I mean. The United States government has talked about a plan to purchase 1 million Bitcoin over the next several years. Now, if you take today's Bitcoin price of roughly $103,000 per token and multiply that by 1 million Bitcoin, you are looking at a cost of approximately $103 billion just to acquire that Bitcoin. That is already an enormous amount of money. But that is just the beginning of the problem, because the real question is not how much it costs to buy the Bitcoin. The real question is how much would Bitcoin need to be worth in order to actually pay off $36 trillion in debt. And when you run that calculation, the number that comes back is absolutely staggering. For the United States government to pay off $36 trillion in debt using 1 million Bitcoin, they would need to sell each Bitcoin at approximately $36 million per token. Let that sink in for just a moment. $36 million per Bitcoin. That is a 360 times increase from where Bitcoin sits today. And if you do the full market cap math on that, you are talking about Bitcoin reaching a total market capitalization of somewhere around $756 trillion. Now, here is the problem with that number. There is only about $50 trillion worth of fiat currency in the entire world right now. So where exactly is this extra money supposed to come from? There is simply not enough money in existence today to push Bitcoin to those levels. And that is not a knock on Bitcoin as a store of value. Bitcoin has done incredible things, and it deserves its place in the crypto ecosystem. But as a tool to pay off national debt, it mathematically does not add up, and somebody needs to have that honest conversation at the highest level of government. Now, this is exactly where XRP enters the picture, and this is where things get really exciting for everyone watching this channel today. Because when you run the same kind of analysis on XRP, the numbers are not only more realistic, they are actually achievable in a time frame that makes real sense. Let me show you what I mean. The circulating supply of XRP right now is roughly around 57 billion tokens when you factor in everything that is out there in the market. Ripple still holds a significant amount in escrow, and exchanges hold a large portion as well. But here is what is fascinating. If you look at just the tokens that are actively circulating and available for the general market to purchase, you start to realize that the available supply is actually much tighter than most people think. And in economics, we all know what happens when demand goes up and supply stays tight. Prices go up. It is as simple as that, and XRP is sitting in a position where that scenario could play out in a very dramatic way. Here is the number that I want you to really focus on today, and that is the figure of $50 trillion. Now, why 50 trillion? Because when you look at what is happening in the world of tokenization right now, when you look at stable coins, central bank digital currencies, the tokenization of stocks, bonds, real estate, and derivatives, you start to see that there is an enormous amount of value that is going to need to move onto blockchain infrastructure over the next 5 to 10 years. The derivatives market alone is in the hundreds of trillions of dollars. The global bond market is over $80 trillion. The global stock market is over $66 trillion. And Ripple and the XRP ledger are actively positioning themselves to capture a meaningful piece of all of that value movement. If even 5 to 10% of that total global value finds its way onto the XRP ledger over the next several years, the price implications for XRP are absolutely extraordinary. So let's run the actual math, because this is where it gets really powerful. If $50 trillion worth of value is added to the XRP ledger, and you account for the circulating supply of XRP at that time, analysts have calculated that the price of XRP could reach approximately $8,800 per token. Now, I know that number sounds big. I know that number sounds like one of those crazy crypto predictions that people throw around just to get clicks and views. But this is not speculation pulled from nowhere. This is based on real market cap mathematics, real liquidity calculations, and real institutional demand that is growing stronger every single month. And when you compare that $8,800 figure to what Bitcoin would need to reach to pay off US debt, suddenly XRP does not sound crazy at all. In fact, it sounds like the most logical and achievable path forward. Now let's talk about why banks specifically are going to move toward XRP, because this is a question that comes up all the time, and it deserves a thorough answer. The traditional banking system relies heavily on something called the SWIFT network for international money transfers. And while SWIFT has made improvements over the years and introduced something called SWIFT GPI to speed up transactions, the reality is that international wire transfers can still take anywhere from 1 to 5 business days and can cost anywhere from $25 to $50 or more per transaction, depending on the banks involved and the countries involved. For individuals, that is annoying. For large financial institutions moving billions of dollars around the globe every single day, that cost adds up to billions of dollars in fees and inefficiencies every single year. And banks are businesses just like any other business. They are always looking for ways to cut costs and improve efficiency. This is exactly why XRP is such a compelling solution for the global banking industry. And I want to share something with you that really puts this into perspective. Michael Arrington, who is one of the early investors in both Ripple and XRP, shared publicly that he was able to move over $50 million using XRP in approximately 2 seconds, and the total cost of that transaction was 30 cents. 30 cents to move $50 million in 2 seconds. Let that number sit with you for a moment, because there is absolutely no way to replicate that kind of speed and cost efficiency using fiat currency or Bitcoin or any other traditional financial instrument. The math is simply not there for anything else. When a bank can move $50 million for 30 cents, instead of paying thousands of dollars in wire fees and waiting multiple business days, the choice becomes very obvious very quickly, and that is exactly the direction that the global banking industry is moving. Now let's talk about something that the XRP community has been buzzing about for a while now, and that is the role of the International Monetary Fund and what their research suggests about the future of cross-border payments. Back in 2023, the IMF published a report focused on improving cross-border payment systems and digital assets. And interestingly, inside that report, they specifically highlighted 2 digital assets as being particularly relevant to the future of global payments. Those 2 assets were XRP and XLM. Now, the IMF did not come out and say that XRP is going to be the global reserve currency overnight. But the fact that a body as influential and as globally respected as the IMF is even mentioning XRP in their official research documents tells you something very important. It tells you that XRP is being taken seriously at the highest levels of global financial governance. And that is not something that happens by accident. The Bank for International Settlements, which is essentially the central bank for central banks, has also published research on money flows that includes a specific reference to private cryptocurrencies playing a role in the future of global financial infrastructure. And when you combine that with the fact that XRP and the XRP ledger are already being tested in multiple countries around the world for central bank digital currency applications, you start to see a very clear picture emerging. The groundwork is being laid right now. The infrastructure is being built right now. The relationships are being formed right now. And by the time the general public fully wakes up to what is happening, the smart money will already be positioned, and the opportunity to get in at these prices may be long gone. Let's also talk about something that often gets overlooked in the XRP conversation, and that is the rich list and the distribution of XRP across different wallets and holders. When you look at where all the XRP currently sits, you see something very interesting. A significant portion is still locked in Ripple's escrow, which means it is not freely circulating in the market. A large portion sits on exchanges. And then you have individual holders like you and me who are holding XRP in personal wallets. Now here is what makes this really significant. As institutional investors start to come into the XRP market in a serious way, as fund managers and hedge funds and banks start to acquire XRP for their portfolios, a lot of that XRP is going to move off exchanges and into long-term holding positions. Just like how institutional investors hold Apple stock or Google stock for years without ever selling it, institutions that acquire XRP for liquidity purposes are going to hold it long-term. And as more XRP moves into these long-term holding positions, the available circulating supply gets tighter and tighter, which creates upward price pressure in a very significant way. Think about what happened when institutional investors started getting serious about Bitcoin. The price went from a few $1,000s to over $100,000. Now imagine that same institutional wave hitting XRP, which has a much smaller market cap, much tighter circulating supply, and a much more specific and valuable real-world use case in global payments and financial infrastructure. The potential for price appreciation is absolutely enormous, and the window to position yourself ahead of that wave is still open right now, but it will not stay open forever. The signals are everywhere for those who are paying attention, and the math clearly supports the case for XRP in a way that very few other assets in the entire crypto market can match. Now, I want to bring this back to the Trump conversation because I think it is really important to connect these dots in a way that makes sense for everyone watching. Trump has openly said that he wants to use crypto to pay off America's national debt. He has talked about Bitcoin as the vehicle for doing that. But as we have already shown, the math simply does not support Bitcoin as a realistic solution to a $36 trillion problem. The market cap that Bitcoin would need to reach to make that happen is so far beyond what is currently possible that it borders on fantasy. XRP, on the other hand, presents a genuinely achievable path for the United States government to pay off $45 trillion in debt using XRP at a price of $8,800 per token. They would only need to acquire approximately 5 billion XRP. And to buy 5 billion XRP at today's prices would cost the government roughly $16 billion. Compare that to the $103 billion it would cost just to buy 1 million Bitcoin today, and you start to see why XRP makes so much more sense as a strategic reserve asset for the United States government. The conversation around a US strategic XRP reserve is gaining more and more traction every single day. And if the United States government were to announce that they are building an XRP strategic reserve, the effects on the market would be immediate, and they would be massive. Banks around the world would rush in, institutional investors would pile in, retail investors would flood in, and the price discovery that would follow would be unlike anything the crypto market has ever seen before. We are talking about a potential market event that would make the Bitcoin bull runs of 2017 and 2021 look small in comparison. And the people who are positioned in XRP before that announcement happens are going to be in a very different financial situation than those who wait on the sidelines until it is already too late. So let's bring everything together and answer the most important question of this entire video. How much XRP do you need to truly change your financial future? Based on everything we have covered today, based on the math around the $50 trillion tokenization opportunity, based on the institutional interest that is growing every single month, based on the IMF research, based on the banking efficiency argument, and based on the very real possibility of a US strategic XRP reserve, the number that keeps coming up is 2,500 XRP. If XRP reaches $8,800 per token, and you are holding 2,500 XRP, your holdings would be worth approximately $22 million. Now, obviously, nobody can guarantee any price target, and you should always do your own research and never invest more than you can afford to lose. But the mathematics and the fundamentals behind XRP have never been stronger than they are right now. And the opportunity in front of us is absolutely real. Thank you so much for watching XRP Global Crypto today. If this video gave you value, if it opened your eyes to something new, if it made you think differently about XRP and the future of global finance, please hit that like button right now, because it helps more people find this content, and it helps us keep bringing you the best XRP analysis anywhere on YouTube. Make sure you are subscribed and have that notification bell turned on so you never miss an update, because things are moving fast in this space and you do not want to be the last one to know. Share this video with anyone you know who is still on the fence about XRP, or anyone who needs to understand why the math points clearly in XRP's favor. We will see you in the next one, and as always, keep holding, keep believing, and keep watching XRP Global Crypto.